In a world where power no longer sits upon a throne, but hides behind economic decisions, algorithms, and faces that always smile for the camera, we, ordinary people, are living inside a battlefield most do not even realize exists. It is the battlefield of influence, manipulation, and sophisticated control. But 500 years ago, there was a man who saw all of this with terrifying clarity. A man who dared to write the truth every ruler wanted to bury. A man who understood that power does not belong to dreamers. It belongs to those who can read the true nature of human beings. In today's video, you will not only explore Machiavelli's ideas, you will learn to see the world through his eyes. You will understand why his words unlocked the hidden mechanisms of every power structure, from politics and economics to the everyday interactions of your own life. If you want to stand firm in an age where everyone is trying to influence you, this is where you begin. Prepare yourself, because what you're about to hear may change the way you see the world forever. Number 1. Secrecy, power, and conspiracy in the modern world. In a world where 24/7 media pours into our eyes like a relentless waterfall, a silent paradox is swelling within the nations considered the most free and democratic on earth. That paradox hides within two simple words: secrecy. A word that sounds harmless, even necessary. But when secrecy becomes the operating principle, when it becomes the curtain that shields massive engines of power, it turns into what John F. Kennedy once called repugnant to a free society. The opening scene draws a near surreal image, an invisible organization functioning like a machine, a single, ruthless conspiracy, tightly knit by silent mechanisms. And this is not a group of men in black suits gathered around a secret underground table. No. These are the modern institutions of power: the military, diplomacy, intelligence, economics, science, politics, all connected, all coordinated, all operating with a level of seamlessness that borders on terrifying. A machine where mistakes are buried, dissenters are silenced, and truth is distorted, manipulated, or simply erased. We don't see this machine. We only see the facade: speeches, articles, carefully curated images, numbers presented as if they were the purest objectivity. But behind the facade lies control over the flow of information: what is allowed to surface, what must be extinguished, what gets elevated into truth, and what is pushed into the swamp of oblivion. When information is controlled, perception is shaped. And when perception is shaped, the actions of an entire society can be guided down a single path, the path the machine wants. This is not the story of some distant nation. This is the nature of power itself. Whenever power remains concentrated in the hands of those who are intelligent enough, ruthless enough, and patient enough, it will always choose secrecy. Because openness is dangerous. Openness invites questions. Openness exposes the powerful. But secrecy? Secrecy does not. And then the video asks a chilling question. How was such a machine built? Who first understood how power behaves when freed from the restraints of morality? Who dared to write truths no king, no pope, no statesman wanted to admit? The answer pulls us back 500 years, to Renaissance Florence, to the place where a man dared to stare into the dark heart of power, and instead of turning away, he recorded everything. No judgment, no embellishment, no veil. Only the cold steel truth, how power is created, used, maintained, and expanded. His name was Niccolo Machiavelli. Part 1 closes with an unsettling truth. What we are witnessing today, from information warfare and propaganda to media control and economic manipulation, is not new. These are simply modern versions of what Machiavelli understood half a millennium ago. And the most frightening part is not their existence, but how accustomed we've become to them without ever noticing. Number 2. Machiavelli. The man, the era, and the birth of his ideas. Late 15th century Florence was not merely a city. It was a crossroads where art, power, and ambition collided. Where the cobblestone streets echoed under the footsteps of giants like Michelangelo, Botticelli, and Leonardo da Vinci. But in those same streets, the smell of oil paint and the clink of chisels were often drowned out by another sound. The whispers of political factions, the scrape of blades drawn in shadowy struggles for power, the hurried footsteps of messengers racing between city-states with news of war. At the center of this blend of brilliance and darkness, a child was born, Niccolo Machiavelli, in 1469. His family was not wealthy, but educated enough to give him the most important gift of that era: classical knowledge. From the age of 7, Machiavelli was exposed to Latin and to the writings of Cicero, Livy, Seneca, men who viewed the world not through divine lenses, but through reason and history. His education belonged to the Studia Humanitatis, the study of humanity. It wasn't merely reading, poetry, or rhetoric. It was learning to see life through the cold, precise eyes of reason, learning to observe human nature, both its nobility and its ugliest shadows. In those classrooms, young Machiavelli read a line from Cicero that would haunt him for the rest of his life. These studies nourish the qualities necessary to serve one's country. And he believed it. But Florence was no safe playground for idealistic minds. It was a battlefield of politics. Italy was not a nation. It was a cluster of micro-universes of power. Rome ruled by the Pope, Milan under the Sforza family, Venice dominant at sea, and Florence shaped by the Medici. Each was its own ambition, its own conspiracy, its own blade pointed at the others. The temporary fall of the Medici in 1494 opened a new era for Florence, Aetius, the Republic. When leadership positions suddenly needed to be filled, the name Machiavelli, then only 29, emerged as an unexpected choice. Not wealthy, not influential, not experienced in diplomacy, but intelligent, politically sharp, gifted with extraordinary observational instincts, and most importantly, he was appointed Secretary of the Second Chancery, then rapidly rose to an even more critical role. Secretary of the Council of 10 for War, responsible for diplomacy, military affairs, and international relations. From here, Machiavelli began the journey that would make him the most perceptive mind on power in his era. Over the next 14 years, he traveled through the courts of Europe. He spoke with kings, dictators, generals, bishops, envoys, and warlords. He observed politics from a vantage point few in his time ever had, behind the curtain. He met Cesare Borgia, believed to be the model for the ideal ruthless prince in the book he would later write. He observed Pope Julius II, a religious leader who ruled politics like a fiery general. He negotiated with the King of France, met the Holy Roman Emperor, and encountered countless rulers whose kindness was nothing more than a costume they wore before the public. And in the rooms where truth was never spoken aloud, Machiavelli realized one thing: power is not what people say. It is what they do when no one is watching. And from this revelation, Machiavelli the thinker emerged. Not a dreamy scholar, but an observer, a chronicler, and the future author of the most dangerous political text ever written. Number 3. The Prince, the most dangerous book in political history. After years navigating the courts of Europe, Machiavelli returned to Florence with eyes that had witnessed far too much. Secret deals, counterfeit smiles, handshakes that became execution orders the next morning. And then, like a fatal knockout blow, the Medici returned to power in 15. The Florentine Republic collapsed. Machiavelli was stripped of office, surveilled, interrogated, tortured, imprisoned, and finally exiled from the very city he had devoted his life to serving. Bleak, humiliating, despairing. Yet it was in this darkness that Machiavelli began writing the book that would immortalize his name. Il Principe, the Prince. He did not write out of revenge. He did not write for fame. Machiavelli wrote to dissect power. He opened the black box every ruler tried to hide, peeled it layer by layer, and exposed under the light truths no one dared to speak. And this is what made the Prince dangerous. It does not preach morality. It describes reality. Not what leaders should do, but what leaders actually do. Yet not how to be a good person, but how to obtain and keep power at all costs. A book so audacious that the Roman Church banned it for more than 200 years. Scholars of the time called it the devil's finger. Although Shakespeare used Machiavel as a synonym for a scheming villain. But why was the book feared so deeply? Because Machiavelli revealed what every court practiced, but none would admit. 1. Power requires force. Mercenaries are not loyal, allies are unreliable, and real power comes from forces one controls personally. 2. Fear is more effective than love. Men betray love more easily than fear. Not because humans are evil, but because they are human. 3. The end justifies the means. The famous line, though not written verbatim, captures the spirit of the Prince. When no higher court exists to judge the ruler, effectiveness becomes the only measure. 4. Appearance matters more than reality. Few see what a ruler really is. Everyone sees what he appears to be. A slap in the face of politics across all ages. People judge by image, not truth. 5. Gifts to win. The people will destroy the state. Generosity feels good, but must be paid with taxes, debt, and eventually resentment. Yet what made The Prince an immortal work was not its rules, but how it forced readers to confront themselves. Rousseau, instead of condemning Machiavelli, praised him. He did not teach tyrants how to rule. He taught the people how to recognize tyrants. Francis Bacon, the father of the scientific method, was even more blunt. We are indebted to Machiavelli. He wrote what men do, not what they ought to do. The Prince became a mirror, reflecting the dark face of leadership. A book every ruler wants to hide, but cannot avoid reading. It paved the way for both democracy and dictatorship. It inspired those who wished to dismantle power and those who sought to seize it. It is a sharp blade. Whether used to save or to harm depends on the hand that wields it. And centuries later, one man would grasp that blade in the most literal way imaginable, turning the ruthless logic of the Prince into a blood-soaked reality the world had never seen. His name was Joseph Stalin. Number 4. Stalin, the most perfect and most brutal disciple of Machiavelli. If the Prince is the blueprint of power, then Joseph Stalin is the man who followed it down to its smallest details, turning every cold instruction Machiavelli ever wrote into policy, into weapons, into blades that never trembled in his hands. When you read the notes Stalin scribbled in his personal copy of The Prince, a chilling realization emerges. It wasn't that Machiavelli wrote for Stalin. It was that Stalin was born to enact Machiavelli. The Soviet Union after the October Revolution was fertile soil for such a man to rise. After Lenin's death, the nation plunged into a brutal power struggle. Everyone wanted to become the successor. Everyone wanted to shape the future of this young regime. But while others argued, debated, and gave speeches, Stalin waited. He observed, remembered, assembled allies, listed enemies, then slowly consolidated power with terrifying patience. Machiavelli once wrote, "If you must injure a man, do it so severely that you need not fear his revenge." Stalin did not simply agree with this, he made it the foundation of his rule. Purges, the art of fear. In the mid-1930s, Stalin launched one of the most horrifying campaigns in human history, the Great Terror. In just 18 months, more than 1,500 people per day were executed or disappeared. Friends denounced friends. Husbands and wives betrayed each other. Children reported their own parents. A society where trust became the rarest luxury. Machiavelli said, "Men sooner forget the death of a father than the loss of their inheritance." Stalin understood this so deeply that he made sure people dared not hold on to any form of dissent, because even their own lives weren't secure. Gulag, the machine that crushed souls. Millions were thrown into the Gulag, a vast network of labor camps stretching from Siberia to the Arctic. Each day there was a battle against hunger, frost, exhaustion, and despair. But the most terrifying aspect wasn't the death. It was the silence. 26 million people shot, imprisoned, or exiled over nearly 3 decades, and the world barely knew. Stalin turned an entire nation into a labyrinth of fear. But what made him the perfect prince in Machiavelli's sense lies in the other half of the power equation: propaganda. Propaganda, the art of making people love their oppressor. Machiavelli warned, "A leader needs the support of the people above all else." Stalin built a flawless cult of personality. Monuments across the Soviet Union, a major city named after him. Stalingrad, books and newspapers allowed only to praise the leader, children taught to thank the father of the nation for their happy childhood. Even fear was made to look comforting. He appeared as a father, a soldier, a humble worker, depending on which audience he wanted to conquer. A legendary detail. After every speech, Stalin received applause that lasted more than 10 minutes. Not out of admiration, but because anyone who stopped clapping first would be arrested. In such a society, truth was no longer truth. It was whatever Stalin declared it to be. And when a ruler controls both fear and love, when he can sow terror and manufacture glory, he holds absolute power. The Machiavellian nightmare made real, Stalin was not merely someone who applied the prince. He was the living proof, the most chilling illustration of Machiavelli's warning. Power, when left unchecked, consumes morality until nothing remains but raw cruelty. And the most terrifying part? The techniques Machiavelli described and Stalin mastered did not vanish when he died. They merely evolved. Number 5. Modern power, propaganda, media, and the game of image. When Stalin died, the world exhaled, not only because a violent era had ended, but because people believed those ruthless techniques of power had died with him. But that was only an illusion. Power never disappears. It merely changes shape, adapts to its environment, becomes more sophisticated, cleaner, And, above all, harder to recognize. In the 20th and 21st centuries, the greatest battlefield is no longer the desert, the sea, or the Sassetups. The new battlefield lies inside the human mind, where every thought, every emotion, every belief can be shaped by something more powerful than any army: mass media. If Stalin had state newspapers, posters, songs, and monuments, modern politicians have something far more potent: television, social media, content distributing algorithms, armies of PR specialists, and highly advanced technologies to construct an ideal image. Machiavelli wrote, "Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand. For everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are." Never has that been more true. Because today, every leader understands one thing: if you appear to be good, you don't need to be good. Image can replace reality. Emotion can overpower reason. Impression can overshadow truth. Do charity to be loved. Announce projects to be trusted. Spend public money to be re-elected. And here lies something Machiavelli saw 500 years ago, but modern citizens struggle to recognize. A leader's generosity does not always come from kindness, but from strategy. The more they spend, the better they look. The more investments in education, healthcare, welfare they announce, the more they appear compassionate, visionary, and noble. But the price of buying affection with money is always taxation, direct tax, or its more subtle form, inflation. Stalin made his people love him through a combination of fear and propaganda. Modern politicians make people love them through money. But where does that money come from? Machiavelli answered long ago. Generosity leads a ruler to ruin and eventually to hatred. Today, no leader wants to go bankrupt. So politicians found a smarter escape. Instead of raising taxes publicly, which angers people, they use something called printing money. A mechanism so simple it's painful. Spend big to gain popularity. Print more money to pay for the spending. Inflation rises. People lose purchasing power, but most don't understand why. Politicians get re-elected anyway. This is the modern transformation of Machiavellian strategy. Crude violence becomes soft power. Direct censorship becomes information control through media and digital systems. Public fear turns into vague anxiety about economic uncertainty. Forced propaganda becomes advertising, curated images, constant screen presence. Today, no one is forced to stand and clap for 15 minutes like under Stalin. But they willingly click like, share, support, and vote for images engineered down to the last pixel. The propaganda machine is no longer crude. It is polished. No longer coercive. It is seductive. No longer rigid. It is entertaining. Machiavelli himself might be astonished to see this. Today, people not only accept manipulation, they unconsciously participate in it. With every view, every swipe, every like on an image they believe is real. Power has never died. It has simply put on a new costume, more elegant, more dazzling, and infinitely more dangerous. Number 6. Fiat currency and the inflation. And the inflation tax, the most sophisticated tool of control. In the ancient world, power lay in swords and spears. Under Stalin, it lay in propaganda and fear. But in the modern era, absolute power lies in something that appears harmless: money. Not money as we once knew it, gold or silver coins with intrinsic value, but an entirely new form of money, invisible, abstract, and capable of destroying quietly. Fiat money. To understand why fiat currency has become a weapon of power, we must look back across thousands of years of monetary history. In the beginning, people traded goods, grain for meat, cloth for tools. But the inconvenience was obvious. So gold and silver, compact, durable, intrinsically valuable, became natural money. For thousands of years, this was the standard. Every unit of currency was backed by something real. A gold coin had value because it was gold. A paper note could be exchanged for gold because a vault full of it stood behind the promise. This unintentionally created a limiting law. No government could overspend or print recklessly when every note had to be supported by actual gold. This limiting law, what Machiavelli would have called the reins that restrain a ruler's ambition, lasted until 1970. When President Richard Nixon announced that the U.S. dollar would no longer be convertible to gold, the entire world entered a new era. Suddenly, every currency in every nation had value only because the government said so. No gold behind it. No scarce material to guarantee it. Only the trust of the people, the most fragile substance in political history. And once money was no longer tied to gold, governments could do what had once been impossible: print as much as they wanted. No need to raise taxes to spend. No need to ask the public for permission to expand budgets. No need to explain why debt skyrocketed while they spent as if repayment would never come due. This was the birth of the most infamous hidden tax in history, the inflation tax. Inflation is a sharp blade wrapped in a soft sheath. No one feels it cutting into their pocket, yet everyone bleeds slowly. $1 from 1913 is now worth 4 cents. Housing, once only a few times annual income in the 1970s, now costs 7 to 10 times that. College tuition, health care, utilities, food, all rising as if pulled upward by an invisible hand. That invisible hand is money printing. The brutality of the inflation tax is this: the rich don't pay it. They own assets, stocks, real estate, gold, Bitcoin, art, things that rise in value as money loses value. The poor are the victims. They hold cash, something that melts away like ice under the sun. When prices rise, they work extra hours. When money loses value, they borrow. When expenses exceed income, they become dependent on loans, credit cards, ending in lifelong debt. No gulag required. No secret police. Just inflation. A weapon that looks soft, yet suffocates more subtly than any dictatorship ever could. In this way, modern power does not need to coerce people. It merely needs to force them into chasing devaluing money, exhausted, too tired to look up and ask, who made everything this expensive? Machiavelli once said, "What destroys a state seldom arrives suddenly. It comes quietly." And in the age of fiat currency, quiet has become the most terrifying form of destruction. Number 7. A dark future, global debt, monetary crisis, and the Machiavellian loop. If Machiavelli were alive today, he would be astonished to see his warnings repeating themselves with near-perfect accuracy, not in feudal kingdoms, but inside the world's most advanced democracies. Because power, no matter what new disguise it wears, still holds its old nature: to expand, to conceal, and ultimately to destroy itself when given too much freedom. After half a century of operating on fiat money, The world is entering a dark zone few citizens recognize. But the numbers speak for themselves. Global debt has surpassed $300 trillion. The U.S. debt to GDP ratio has exceeded 130%, higher than during World War II. And if governments continue their reckless spending, projections show that by the year 2100, the U.S. alone could reach $1 quadrillion in debt, a number that sounds like science fiction, yet is based on real data. The question is no longer, will a crisis happen? The question is, when will the Machiavellian cycle collapse? Because every empire in history, Rome, Spain, Germany, ancient China, fell not because of stronger enemies, but because of internal exhaustion. And the biggest common denominator was always the same: devalued money, exploding debt, a fractured society. Today, that cycle is unfolding on a global scale. Politicians no longer think about the future. They think about their term. Machiavelli wrote that a leader must see far ahead. But modern politicians have no incentive to do so. They don't need to fix the roots of problems. They only need to survive another 4 years. So they promise more projects, more welfare, more subsidies, more spending. And when spending grows too large, what do? Print more money. They fear no consequences, because the consequences won't happen during their terms. Inflation, collapse, disguised in numbers. When everything becomes more expensive, people see only the rising prices of food, fuel, rent. They don't see the invisible hand behind it, the hand of the very leaders they voted for. They fail to connect the dots: spending, money printing, inflation, poverty, debt, chaos. This is the Machiavellian loop. Rulers buy loyalty with gifts, then use numbers to hide the damage they themselves created. When debt becomes too large, there are only 3 escape routes, all of them terrible default, collapsing the global financial system in a chain reaction. Austerity, cutting welfare, raising taxes, triggering unrest, protests, riots. Print money to pay the debt, leading to hyperinflation, like Germany in 1923, or Zimbabwe, or Venezuela. Whichever path is chosen, the ending is always the same: a loss of trust in the currency. And when money collapses, everything collapses with it. Government, institutions, public trust, social order, social. The power cycle. What Machiavelli saw 500 years ago. Machiavelli never sought to make people into tyrants. He simply described how power behaves when left unchecked. And in the age of fiat money, where politicians can spend infinitely without accountability, we are witnessing the modern version of his prophecy. Power no longer needs violence to dominate. It uses debt, inflation, propaganda, the illusion of prosperity. It doesn't need to silence people with force. It only needs to keep them busy chasing devaluing money, exhausted to the point they no longer raise their heads to ask, who made everything so expensive? Machiavelli wrote, "What collapses quickly is whatever is built on illusion." We are living inside the greatest illusion in human history, the illusion that paper money can survive forever, that debt never has to be repaid, that a society can print its way into prosperity. One day, 10 years, 50 years, or a century from now, this loop will end. And when it ends, the world will be forced to revisit what Machiavelli warned half a millennium ago. Power never dies. It merely changes its form. But truth, no matter how long it is hidden, always returns. In the modern world, power is no longer loud, like the clash of swords in Machiavelli's era. It is quieter, sharper, and far more dangerous, because it hides behind promises, numbers, smiles, and the screens we stare into every day. But Machiavelli left us a gift: the ability to recognize power, understand how it works, and, most importantly, avoid becoming its victim. When you understand people, when you understand motives, when you understand how the world operates behind the curtain, you are no longer afraid. You become proactive. You become the one steering your life instead of being tossed around by invisible forces. Remember Machiavelli's words: "He who sees the truth is always at an advantage over the one who lives in illusion." And if you've made it this far, it means you are ready to join that group. The group that not only watches the world, but understands it. If you want to continue exploring the strategies of power, psychology, and mindset that make you stronger every day, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. The journey is long, and I want to walk it with you.